And then Grace came back, and the two of them got on a bus. Some white kid who should have been in school but was playing hooky like a good hoodlum should, tried to follow them on the bus, and Grace said something to the effect, "I'm just aching to punch somebody in the nose."
She told him to get off the bus, or she
Don't
punched him.
get off, yes. And the bus driver,
And he did get off.
and the bus driver chased this white hoodlum off. If the bus driver had been a stinker, something bad could have happened, but he wasn't. And Grace and Elizabeth sat down together in the bus, and off the bus went, and they went to their respective homes. Following that, in short order, came a subpoena for Grace from not the House Un-American Committee, but Senator Eastland's Internal Security Subcommittee. He was a notorious senator from Mississippi, as racist as you could get, who, while the war was on, had made a speech in which he denounced black soldiers as too cowardly to fight and too lazy to work, his phrasing. Anyway, he jumped in, and Senator Jenner, Republican of Indiana, was made chair of that subcommittee, and the abuse of Grace started. She refused, of course, to answer any of their questions.
She was subpoenaed to Memphis.
Yes,
It was in
that's
Memphis,
right, that's
yeah.
important. They weren't going to hold a hearing in Nashville. It was in Memphis, Tennessee. And she had, I think, only 2 or 3 days' notice.
So the subpoena came on Friday afternoon, and she had to appear Monday morning.
Really?
Right.
I was 13.
Yeah. And Alice went with her for support. I couldn't go, I was teaching. But Alice went, which was a good thing, and which comforted Grace very much. So,
I'm not sure she would have agreed with you about that.
What?
I think she ended up looking after me more than me.
Yeah.
being
well,
in
but
it.
it at least detracted her attention from her own troubles. And she was vigorously denounced by the committee, and of course was given a lot of publicity, and that reopened, of course, the question of my adventure with the Un-American Committee. Meanwhile, I'd been tried for contempt of Congress, and the judge acquitted me. And in it, in his decision, he pointed out that the questions they put to me were not relevant either in time or purpose, or time or place, to any legislative purpose. And I should say something about the trial. Grace didn't come to trial because they couldn't seek an indictment against her. But in my case, of course, the trial was held, and it was a slightly unusual trial for that type of case, in that we did not stipulate the accuracy of the printed record. Normally that's done to save time. But there were some aspects that could be opened if somebody had to testify. And Gordon Scherer, the chair of the subcommittee for which I had appeared in Dayton, represented the committee. And he couldn't remember why they had decided to subpoena me on the cross-examination. He couldn't remember why, when so many other people had been named before the committee, they'd chosen me instead of some of the others. And the clincher was, he couldn't even remember where in the world I lived so that the subpoena could be served on me. See, they couldn't admit that they'd been called by this paper to pull me up. And by the time he got done testifying, the judge was looking at him in a funny way and took a recess for a while. There was a young woman from the local Dayton newspaper. The trial was in Dayton, of course, where the alleged offense occurred. There was a young woman there, and Sheriff made a beeline for her. I was on the other side of the room. And I couldn't hear what was being said, but I could see the happy expression on his face, and she was giving him the batted eye treatment. And I thought, oh my God, what's going to be in the paper about me tomorrow? He gets all done looking very pleased with himself, and then in a loud voice, this young woman says, "Mr. Scherer, your memory is so much better when you're not under oath, isn't it?" And he just stomped off.
Dad, tell about the witnesses against you. That there were the two, when you were called up. There was the one guy who named you because you were the name on the list he didn't recognize, so he thought it would be safe to name you.
No,
the St.
that
Louis
was
guy?
a separate occasion.
What was that?
No, they didn't have any witnesses against me at the Drayton trial.
No, but before at the hearing, when you were
at the
called.
hearing.
I forgot to mention. They're kind of funny.
No, they didn't have any witness. I'd been named before that committee a dozen years previously and never been called before. So that was in their records.
That was that guy from the dentist from St. Louis?
No, I don't remember that. I'll have to look it up. I researched it carefully at the time, of course, and it's all in writing. But this was, so anyway, I was acquitted. So you might say I won, but I lost too, because I lost my job. And the family was disrupted. We had to move to another city. Now, Grace was threatened with contempt of Congress. They didn't actually follow through on it. And I had known Estes Kefau for a little bit in Tennessee. He was senator from Tennessee. When we were living there, I had some contact with him. And I wrote him a letter. He was a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, of which the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee was a subcommittee. So any contempt citation would have to go through the full Judiciary Committee and then through the Senate. So I wrote to Kefau about it very carefully, "Dear Senator Kefau," so on. I got an answer from him rather promptly. "Dear Lee, said I have followed this matter. If there is any effort to get a contempt citation against Grace, I will speak against it in the committee. If it goes through the committee, I will speak against it on the floor of the Senate. However, I don't think they will proceed any further because I think they've gotten what they want. Your friend Estes." So it was rather remarkable in that era for him to write such a letter. But he was an unusual senator. He was the only member of the Senate to vote against the Communist Control Bill. And I can give another member of the Senate a small plus sign. Senator Lehman of New York, a couple of years later, got up and made a speech in the Senate apologizing for having voted for it and praising Kefau for having been the only person with nerve enough at that time to oppose it. So you can see there were a lot of pressures there which different people felt in different ways. I mentioned the method of control of black institutions through white-dominated or foundation-dominated boards and donations and whatnot. But there was another way, too, and that was dramatically illustrated in the case of Allen University in Columbia, South Carolina. Allen University was one of a chain of colleges, highly exceptional, run by the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And Richard Allen was the founder of that church, and so their flagship college bears his name, Allen University. And when the Supreme Court decision, May 1754, came down, the governor, Timmerman, of South Carolina, demanded that the president of Allen University fire three professors at Allen who had been active in anti-racist work, in the state, thinking thereby to intimidate anybody who was going to jump on the Supreme Court decision for further progress. The president agreed, fired them. The board assembled, fired the president, and restored the professors. But that was far from the end of the story. Timmerman said, okay, it's their right, can't quarrel with it, but I have my rights too. As governor, I can instruct the Board of Education, State Board of Education, and I hereby do so. No alumnus or student of Allen University shall do practice teaching in the South Carolina public schools. 80% of the students at Allen were in the teacher training program. Because in those days, you were either on one side of the desk with a roll book or on the other side with a broom. That was, in the South, being a teacher was a big occupation. It was dignified, you had a regular salary, and you felt you were doing something. So, of course, the school couldn't stand up under that. But they behaved better than other schools did. They transferred these professors to other AME schools in other states. One of them wound up in Canada, by the way, even in Ontario at Lakehead University. He's no longer living. But that's another example of what the struggle faced and faces to this day. At Philander Smith College, I had one student go on to get a PhD in mathematics from NYU, the only Philander Smith student to go on with a PhD in mathematics. And he came back to Arkansas and became dean at the state college there. But, and he did other things too. He didn't use up all his time. He engaged in various businesses, so on, all honorably, but still I wish he'd been in a place where doing science was what would motivate him.
Well, maybe we should stop there. Why don't we stop here? We'll come back and...
Yeah,
Well, let me
Stephen
just
promised to
add
come
a
back.
couple of footnotes.
Sure.
to this. It's, I mentioned having been fired at City College. In 1990, they gave me an honorary doctor's degree for the reasons for which they'd fired me, essentially.
Yeah.
Harry Belafonte got one at the same,
Yeah, I was there.
occasion. It was a big day. Fisk University later gave me an honorary doctor's degree. Again, on that. And one of the members of the board at Fisk at the time I was fired, I meant to say something about Calvin McKissick. Because again, it's an illustration of the social circumstances. Black man, contractor and architect, very rich because he had the contract for most of the black schools and institutions in the area. After the board meeting was over, I ran into him on the street. He said, I suppose you know how everybody voted. I said, yes, I do. He said, I've seen terrible things at Fisk. This is by far the worst. I said, why didn't you say so at the board meeting? He said, look here, I consider myself brave for having abstained. He said, I'm a rich man, I don't deny that. If you need money, I'll be glad to give you some out of my own pocket. But I don't build these buildings out of my pocket. I have to go to these banks and get big loans for them. He said, at that board meeting, 2 white men sat, one on each side of me. He says, I'll bet it was the first time either one of them sat next to a Negro in his life. Between them, they control my credit. And then years later, when I got the honorary degree from Fisk, he was no longer living, but his niece was on the Fisk Board of Trustees at that time. And she came over with wet eyes, teary eyes. Uncle Calvin would have been so happy today.
It's great.
So that's part of the story.